All right, this is our first video of the year on the history part of the course. This is called The Essence of American History, Accident and Force versus Reflection and Choice. So we've got a framing question for the year. What is most excellent about America and thereby American history? Take a minute and write a brief answer to that question. What is most excellent about America and thereby American history? And it's possible that you haven't given that question much thought. It's even probable you haven't given it that much thought, and that's okay. We just want to know where you are in your answer right now. So now take a second and reflect on your answer. Are you happy with your answer? Does it do justice to the pride you take in being an American? Give that some thought. Does your answer highlight a trait that ranks America competitively against other countries, such as it has the largest economy, or rather highlights an excellence from within, such as maximizes individual freedom, or categorize your answer? What kind of answer is it? What is it about America that makes it great? Are you comparing it to other countries? Is it a competitive thing? What's going on with what you think is best? There's this guy you may have heard of, Alexander Hamilton. He has a famous musical about him that's on Disney Plus now. We might watch parts of it, I suppose. He wrote a bunch of essays to defend the Constitution, and they were put in a book called The Federalist. And essay number 1, first paragraph, he says the following, one of the more profound utterances in the history of the country. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, namely America, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. The key phrases here are accident and force and reflection and choice. What does he mean by those? And why is this a fundamental statement in American history? This is what the American experiment is about. Can we govern ourselves through reflection and choice, or are we doomed to use accident and force? So what do these key phrases mean? Accident and force. Well, it's just like it sounds like. We have ended up because of whatever accidents of, we've got iron ore in our country and the neighboring one doesn't, and we've used that to get better weapons, and we're going to use those weapons to enforce our rule on these people next door, and they're going to have to work for us. Reflection and choice, that's a different matter. That's people coming together and saying, what's the best way to live? How do people thrive? And then how can we establish a system of government that will help as many people as possible thrive? So the difference is we happen to be strongest. We will enforce our strength on others so that they will feed us. Versus we have tried to figure out the best way to live for everybody, and we choose to live by the rules that will be best for everybody to live by. Put perhaps more eloquently, the historian Jill Lepore says, can a political society really be governed by reflection and election, by reason and truth, rather than by accident and violence, by prejudice and deceit? Is there any arrangement of government, any constitution by which it's possible for a people to rule themselves justly and fairly and as equals through the exercise of judgment and care? Or are their efforts, no matter their constitutions, fated to be corrupted, their judgment muddled by demagoguery, their reason abandoned for fury.
So let's just go over some examples, right? What would it mean to go for a government to occur through accident and force? Well, the wind blows favorably for one side during a naval battle, allowing it to win and establish itself in power. That would be accident and force. Monarchies might have intelligent, capable, healthy rulers born, or unintelligent, incompetent, sickly rulers born. They're stuck with whatever accident happens. One group may have immunity to diseases that another doesn't have, allowing the immune group to seize power from the weakened group. One group may have access to a resource such as iron ore that allows it to craft steel for weapons, while another group does not. Because life on Earth evolved nearly exclusively during periods of intense scarcity, people tend to form in groups and out groups and compete against each other to grab and sustain power over each other. That's how the world had worked, more or less, up until the 1770s, where this group of guys came together and they said, can we establish the constitution of governing a country that doesn't do that everybody else has done?
So, examples of establishing government through reflection and choice. And again, the U.S. is early to the game here, so there's not going to be that many examples, but we'll find those we can. The Magna Carta was an early power sharing agreement in England between the monarchy and nobility. It went back centuries. English common law established laws that tended toward being binding for everyone, not just made by some people for other people to have to live by. Slavery was gradually banned throughout the world because it violated the implicit rights of the enslaved. The American Declaration of Independence claimed that all men were created equal and endowed with the equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American Constitution enshrines self-government of the people, by the people, and for the people, though, as we will discuss, only a limited number of people count as people at the beginning. These would be examples of establishing government through reflection and choice. We're going to reflect, see what the best way to operate for everybody is, and then we're going to choose those ways. We're not going to let accident determine that some people are stronger than others, and then let their strength determine the relationships between people, between free and enslaved, or free and serfed, or free and working 20-hour weeks, days, and 80-hour weeks and such. And so we'll talk about this throughout the whole year. So this course will have its own answer to what was most exceptional about the American founding. And it is, in a nutshell, a bunch of guys who could have completely gamed the system for their own advantage, like everybody else had throughout history, didn't. They tried to set up a system of government in which everyone could thrive. And again, not everybody counted as somebody who counted, unfortunately, at the founding. And it took a long time for people to become enfranchised in those promises. But that at least was the idea. And at the time, it was just an outrageous idea. People really didn't believe it was possible. And we're going to talk about that all year. So let's just think of how radical they were. Imagine that you could establish a government that had laws, but you didn't have to obey them. You and your friends didn't have to. Only other people had to obey them, and that they had to obey them for you, and that you were above the law. What would you do? So you think about the Lord of the Rings, where those people who have access to the rings of power, they just go crazy for those rings, right? It turns them into kind of these demons. But what would you do if you could make other people live by your rules, and you and your friends wouldn't have to? Would you make common rules for everybody and live by them? Or would you make people live by your rules and you'd be above the rules? Well, why did the founders forego their advantages in accident and force? Well, perhaps because they had experienced what it was like to be a subjected power, and they hated it, and they didn't want that anymore. They didn't want to be on either side of that issue, because they realized that facilitating the flourishing of each citizen would help the entire society flourish.
That's true of them because they realize that treating others nobly ennobles everyone, including themselves. And in summary, because they realize that the highest form of power is power for others and not power over others. And we're going to talk about that all year. So, some reflection questions. If you yourself would have been alive at the time of the revolution, would you have had the nobility to grant power to others, or would you have grabbed all that you could get for yourself? Explain. You may want to take a minute and consider that right now. You can be a founder or a grabber in this humanities class, in your 8th grade class, in your peer groups, and on your teams. Are you empowering others or just grabbing power for yourself? When one of your peers says or does something that makes him vulnerable, do you tend to take advantage of the accident of his weakness by using force to demean him more? Or do you reflect on what is best for him and everyone and choose to do what is best? So, what are the short term takeaways here? Explain what the passage from Federalist 1 means. Give examples of governance by accident force and also of how the American founding tried to govern by reflection and choice. Explain why the American founding was exceptional. Explain why the founders, having the advantages of accident force, decided to forego them in favor of governing by reflection and choice. And translate the passage from the Federalist into your own concise language. What do you think it means? How would you say it if you were explaining it to a friend? And then the longer term takeaways: recite or write the passage from memory, cold, without recent cramming. Give some historical examples of how the American founding failed to govern by reflection and choice. Explain why the passage is essential to understanding America and its history. Explain how we could apply this passage to improve the quality of our lives.